Good morning, everybody. It's just about 9 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. I'm a little bit of a smaller group today, but that is just fine. We still have lots to discuss, and hopefully we'll have time to respond to some questions or any prompts, clarifications that folks have. My name is Nicole Medor. I'm an early childhood specialist at the Department of Education, and I believe Marcy is here. Can you hear us, Marcy?
I can. I'm here. Good morning, everybody. I'm Marcy Whitcomb. I'm the early childhood monitor at the department.
Okay, some quick housekeeping items as usual. Link to the guidebook was provided via email. However, you can type in this address into your web browser and it should bring you right to it. It's also available on our public preschool site at the main DOE. And if needed, we can plop that into the chat box as well. A 1-hour contact certificate will be available at the end of the meeting. And at any time, please feel free to unmute yourself, ask questions, utilize the chat box feature. We also had set up a parking lot, which actually I'm going to toss that in the chat box really quick as well. You recall it's just a Google form. It looks like this. And you can just click and drag a colored box into the bigger one and you'll be able to type a question or a thought anonymously. I've tried to go in behind the scenes outside of this meeting together to provide some clarification or answers to some of the questions, and those are done in the white box. So feel free, wow, Nicole, feel free to use this feature at any point during the meeting or outside of the meeting as well, if something comes up for you. And as usual, we won't have any scheduled breaks, so please take care of any personal items that you might have at any time. Okay, quick review of our schedule. We've already completed the top 2 sessions, and those are recorded and housed on our professional learning and resource page. I provided that link via email, and I'm happy to provide it again after today's session. Today we'll be talking about the section on collaborations and partnerships, which can be found on page 11 and 12. And then our remaining 4 sessions are scheduled below every Wednesday at 9 through July 28th. Today's subtopics will look at local community needs, partnerships with other programs, and partnership quality and accountability. And I just want to reiterate, these topics and this section is not a requirement of public pre-K programs, right? So you can easily, and many do, have state-funded public pre-K in their school districts that do not have a partner. Whether that's a child care, a Head Start, or even just a local library, you know, somebody that assists in your day-to-day programming. That is not a requirement. We'll dig in a little bit deeper today, though, about why these partnerships and collaborations will benefit positively the students in your programs, and not just in 4-year-old programs, but through the elementary years as well. Okay, before I get going, is there anything that I can address now? Just take a minute. Okay, so local community needs begins on page 11. And in that section, it starts off by saying that a high quality preschool program will only be beneficial if it addresses the local community's needs for early childhood care and education. So if you think about it, having a pre-K program in your school and available to 4-year-olds in your community, you want it to meet the needs of those families, right? It's common practice, and I get it, for schools to just have a pre-K program to provide it for their families, and because for one reason or another, more often than not, because they know that later on in life, it'll increase student outcomes if they have a high quality pre-K program. But to have a pre-K, just for the sheer fact of having a pre-K, won't necessarily do that, right? It's not necessarily going to meet the needs of the families who want to access that program. And with that said, many of our pre-K programs in Maine have been around since the 80s. And it's certainly grown over time. It sort of exploded, for lack of a better word, more so in the early 2000s. But from early 1980s through the 90s, pre-K programs were alive and well in many of our school districts. With that said, many of them haven't changed. Many of them are still operating in the same way in terms of hours, days per week, etc., as they did when they first opened way back when. So taking a real good look at your community's needs and how that has likely changed over the years is going to be really important in terms of providing high quality care. So there's a few ways you can do that. This is not the only few ways, certainly there's more, but the ones that are highlighted in the guidebook mention a local community assessment. So this is something that you'll want to do, and I would encourage you to do every few years, 5, 8, 10 years, as your community grows over time and potentially changes over time. Some of our rural areas arguably haven't, perhaps, but certainly that doesn't mean that we can't just throw out something to assess the needs of our community members. So this is talking about our local child cares, any family, friend, and neighbor care, any Head Starts, any doctor's offices, any libraries, literally any business that operates in your community. And just sending out something, a survey, a letter, if you're small enough and you feel like you have somebody that can go and people in person, whatever's going to best accommodate your needs. But working to identify their existing education and special education services. So what do they offer for young children in your area? And then once you have those responses, try to determine some of the existing gaps. So you might see that there's a lot of opportunity for play and learn groups, but maybe not a lot of opportunity for students with special education needs and wanting to provide a space to accommodate more inclusive practices, etc. Right? It truly varies, but try to get an idea of what's already available and what might be lacking in services in your community. And then thinking about how your pre-K program might fill those gaps. Another way to sort of gauge what's needed in the community is to survey the parents, right? So whether they're current students or just parents that live in your area that don't utilize your public school, maybe they do home care or homeschooling, and reaching out to them and finding out what their needs for childcare are, what their needs for educational opportunities are, what they want to see available for their students. And it's very possible that you'll find that some parents need or want or would access a full day, full week program, while other parents wouldn't, right? They might think that 12 hours a week of pre-K for their child is plenty. So in that scenario, it could very well be that you have a classroom in your program that offers full day, full week to meet the needs of those families. And you might also have another classroom that meets for less, half day perhaps, or only a few full days to meet the needs of other families, right? It could totally vary across every program. You don't have to have all of your classrooms offer the same dosage of time, right? You could very easily sort of mix it up to meet the needs of who's attending. This is something that we often do here at the department, which is to examine recent kindergarten enrollment numbers. So when folks from the legislature or from the communities or even national agencies reach out to us and ask, how many pre-K students are you serving in your public schools? We gauge it by the number of kindergarten students who are enrolled. So we'll go in, we'll see, okay, in school year 2018-2019, we served over 12,000 5-year-olds in our kindergarten classrooms. But in that same school year, we only served 6,000 4-year-olds in our pre-K programs. So that tells us that there's a gap of enrollment, right? So we're missing about 6,000 4-year-olds in our schools. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some families just don't send their students, which is totally their choice. Others, however, schools, meaning they don't have the space to accommodate perhaps all of the students that are in their catchment area. So there's a gap there, right? So taking a look at what your kindergarten enrollment numbers are at your school and comparing that to the pre-K numbers that you have will give you a pretty good idea of where there's a lack, where there's a gap in your service. And then finally, we encourage you to establish or work to maintain partnerships and collaborations. And this might be a formal partnership, right? So you might have a Head Start partner or a local child care center who partners with you to also provide public pre-K programming. Okay, that exists. It's alive and well throughout Maine. And in fact, Marcy will talk in a minute about the needs that we have to expand that. However, it doesn't mean you have to have a formal partnership to provide programming, but at the very least, have a partnership or a collaboration where you're meeting and interacting regularly with these other folks in your area because you're serving the same population of students and families, right? Share ideas, share resources, get an idea of who's out there in terms of students and who are you serving through your entity, who are they serving through their entity. You could meet by telephone, in person. Some folks meet regularly with their folks in their community. This doesn't have to be a one and done, right? It's not just when you are starting your program. It should be ongoing throughout the years. Okay, and then you could, like I said, consider establishing a formal partnership if the need is there. If you can only serve 16 4-year-olds, but you know there's about 40 in your community, then you might need a formal partner to accommodate programming for the other students. So I'm going to take a minute and take a quick poll. We're a small group, 22 folks, and that's counting Marcy and I. So, you know, this will just give us sort of a little bit of insight into where folks are at in terms of who's on the call today. So we're going to do an activity called stamping. If you're not familiar with this, I'll provide you some quick steps on how to access this. If after my instructions you don't have access to this on your Zoom, that's totally fine. Just sort of sit back, relax, and see how it plays out, I guess. So what you're going to want to do is locate the annotate icon. You should see this on your Zoom bar. For some people, it might show up under more. So if you click more, then you'll see annotate in that list. So take a second and see if you can. If you're joining on a phone, it might be harder. So again, no worries. This is just a quick activity.
Nicole, I'm also going to offer up that mine is found at the very top of my screen where it says I'm viewing your screen, and then it has a little view options. Okay. And if you do the view options, there's a little drop down. That's where I can find mine. So it's different on everybody's screen, but.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll just provide a few seconds for folks to sort of fish around on your screen, see if you can find that annotate. If you do see it and you click on it, then it should bring up a bar like this at the top. You'll see a variety of options, and we're going to use the stamp. When you click on stamp, there's a check mark, a star, I think there's a heart, there's a variety of different stamps that you could choose from. And then you can click on your own screen and that stamp should anonymously appear. If you do that and you do it by mistake, no worries, you can always undo or clear it. I also have the power to clear. So for example, I just popped on my stamp and I'm going to choose the check mark, and I'll click the screen and a green check mark. There you go. I see all kinds starting to pop up now. Perfect. Okay, good. So it looks like some folks are able to access that. So I'm going to clear them and hold on for just a minute, because on our next screen, I have to stop my annotate. On our next screen, I have pictures of those 4 options. So there's one for a community needs assessment. There's one for family survey. There's one for kindergarten enrollment numbers, and one for partnership. And my question is this. Of you on this call, put a stamp over one or any of these examples of community needs assessments, and of the ones that you have been a part of or you know your district has conducted before. Just trying to gauge which of these might be new ideas and which of these might be tried and true. when we were planning the session today as well, Marcy and I were looking for sample needs assessments. That's a question that we get asked a lot. There's no black and white version of a needs assessment. If you were to Google it or look at some national sites, there are some examples that exist that you can sort of change and morph to be specific to your community. I know Head Starts will often conduct needs assessments. So if you have a Head Start partner or a Head Start in your community, that's something that you could reach out to them for assistance on. Same as family surveys. That's something that's going to be unique to you as far as looking at what your families need. Partnerships. Okay, so it looks like there's a pretty good sort of shared knowledge of each of these. Certainly needs assessment is less. When schools start brand new pre-K programs, we ask them to show proof of outreach to their community agencies that already exist. And that happens all the time, which is great. But what I fear is that that's a one and done. You know, we did this, now we have a pre-K program, let's move on with our lives. And what I really want to encourage is schools to maintain and continue that conversation, whether that's through a needs assessment, you know, annually, every 5 years, whatnot, like I said, or not. But that needs assessment is a really great tool and a really great way to see how your program can work with your community and not against it. And in that parking lot and that Google form, if there's any other questions or clarifications that folks want or need from any of these, just let us know. I'm going to clear our stamps because if I don't, they're going to show up on every slide. So you can go ahead and X out of your annotate, which is the red X to the right of that annotate bar.
Okay, so we're going to move on now to partnerships with other programs. There's a lot of information around this right now. There's a really big sort of push to educate SAUs and community partners around barriers and benefits and myths and everything. And we'll talk more about that at the end of this piece. But this piece is on page 11. And so the first thing to ask the question is, why are partnerships important? And there's a number of different reasons. I've listed a few. We're working toward universal pre-K in our state. And in order to do that, we need community partners. The reasons for that are many. A lot of it has to do with space. A lot of our schools are older. They're also fully populated, and a lot of our schools school buildings do not have space to add classrooms or space that is sort of retrofitted for our youngest learners, because there are some certain guidelines around that also. Community partners have space, they have children already enrolled, they have the things that 4-year-olds need, and so partnering in that way is a good choice. Funding can be beneficial. I'm not going to go a whole lot into funding, but funding can be beneficial between partners. With, you know, staffing, shared staffing, shared professional development, materials. A lot of people that we've reached out, our programs we've reached out for partnerships have many of those materials, have staff already. SAUs can help with the funding of that. And shared PD, I think, is a really important one, because I have been in many programs before where pre-K is maybe one classroom, maybe two, so there's 2 lead teachers, maybe a couple of ed techs, and a lot of times those teaching staff, those educators, get thrown into professional development with kindergarten, first, second grade, third grade, working on assessments and standardized testing and things that we just don't actually do in pre-K. And so when you are partnering with the community partner, you have a lot more staff that you're working on training, and you can do some more focused professional development around pre-K best practice, and a whole bunch of other things that are specific to working with 4-year-olds. Another really important thing to think about is family choice. So like Nicole was saying earlier, when you do a family needs assessment, you may find that a lot of families are interested in a full day, full week program. Some families are working from home, or they're working part-time, or they're working in the evening, and they want to have a half-day program or 2-day week or something like that. When you are partnering with community partners, you have the ability to have different choices for families. So there may be wraparound care, there may be before and after care, there may be, you know, some partnerships or some programs may have transportation, others may not, and it gives families a lot of choice around how they want to set up their children's education. And in that way, we're serving more families. And that's the other one important thing that I didn't put up here, but why partnerships are important. It really helps us serve the number of families that we're looking to serve. And if we're doing it in partnerships, we can have more classrooms and more families and more children, and that's hugely positive. So down on the side, and I know that we just talked about this a little bit also, I need to move us out of the way so I can see what I'm doing. So currently in our state, 35% of our public pre-K programs partner with community partners. Out of that 35%, the majority of those partner with Head Start programs. And I think Nicole said in the last slide, we are currently serving around 50% of pre-K students. That number is taken from the kindergarten enrollment from, I think, 2019 was the last current fully enrolled data that we had. And if you want to click on the slide, I don't know what the term for that is. But okay, so who are our community partners? Public schools partner with private preschool centers, private child care centers, Head Start programs, family child care programs and centers, and then local cultural centers and programs. This is not an exclusive list, and it's certainly not, there's certainly a lot of other ideas out there that maybe we just haven't had an opportunity to learn about, or people aren't, you know, as community partners, as we do assessments and we figure out who our partners are in our communities, there may be other choices, and that's perfectly fine and amazing. And so what I would like to do is another annotate activity. And so if you are, I know on the last slide, a number of you had mentioned, stamped that you were in a community partnership. So if you are in a community partnership currently, if you would pull out your annotate and your stamping one more time, and then just depending on who your community partner is, just throw a stamp on whoever your district is partnered with.
While folks do that real quick, Marcy, I'll just address a quick question in the chat from Mary Beth, which was around how does that work, meaning partnering work with teacher pay, contracts, benefits. I know of a school district that partners with Head Start, and the teachers were offered Head Start pay, which was significantly lower than public schools, and the pre-K teachers. Oh, and the pre-K teachers had 081 certification. Most of them all quit as their pay plummeted. Any thoughts? So this is a really common conversation as well that we have, and I can let you talk to this too, Marcy, so I didn't mean to jump in, but around pay parity. And that's just a statewide issue in and of itself, let alone within partnerships. The conversation of higher education, higher pay for early child care educators is one that's ongoing. In terms of a partnership, there's no one size fits all in terms of how a school can partner with a private agency. So some districts will require that any lead teacher is on the school's pay, right? So whether you partner with a Head Start program or a private preschool center, the lead teacher, the one with the 081, must be part of the school district's contract. That's not a requirement. That's just how some partnerships function. In other areas, however, Head Start, if that's your partner, Head Start has their staff and they pay them upon their agreements, and the school district has their staff, they pay them upon their agreements. Sometimes a school district will bring the 081, the Head Start will provide the ed tech, or vice versa. Sometimes it'll be strictly a Head Start program, but it's housed in the public school, and that's the way they partner, right? So there's a variety of ways that can happen. We would encourage all conversations around partnering, however, to make sure that pay parity is part of the conversation in recruiting teachers, in sustaining teachers, sustaining your program, and having high quality. You know, I don't know if you would add anything to that, or if there's any other questions that come from that. Just leave it here for a moment.
Yeah, so we're going to actually get to a checklist next, and I think that it's 100% on the checklist. I think that is one of the things that is very important when you're starting your partnership. It's not something to kind of wait until the end and figure out. It's a really important piece of it.
Yeah, and I did too, sorry, see that somebody has stamped that our community partner they have is a family childcare program. So if that person would be willing to message me, I'd be really interested in that. I hoped that some of these exist, but with the last 2 years and the way we've collected data, we've sort of lost touch with who's in partnership with who. So I'd be really curious to know more about that family child care partnership, because that's something that we would like to also encourage and support districts in doing, but there's just not many in existence, so it's hard to know. So if whomever stamped that could message me privately, I would really appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to clear the stamps now.
I do also want to mention, I was just reading a question in the chat again, that when districts are partnering with community partners, there are, like Nicole said, there's no one way to do it. Everybody does it differently, and that is good, because every community is different, every partner is different, every district is different. But I do know of Head Start collaborations with public pre-Ks where the Head Start brought in the 081s, but they had a pay parity agreement with the school. So the 081s through the Head Start were getting paid the same as the public school teachers. So that also happens. It's just a matter of how the communication goes, who can bring what to the table, and what is best for the community and partners, essentially. I think the next slide, yep, I have us. Ooh. Sorry, I just really messed up my screen and my view. Okay, there we go. Okay, so on page 29 of the guidebook, there is Appendix F, and this is the collaboration checklist. It is about 3 pages long, and so I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but I'm just going to give you an idea of what's in every section. So there are the 4 sections. The first one is general information. And so this checklist is really important because it's important to know who's present at the table when you're building a collaboration or partnership, which entity is responsible for which pieces, and what pieces are most important or what can be phased in over time. And this is a place really to start making a plan, see all the pieces in one place. To me, it's a little overwhelming, but it's also important to understand that this is a tool to start the process and to continue the process, and that some pieces you may not, if you're not offering transportation, that's obviously not a piece you would want to talk about, or if you haven't dealt with 504s in your pre-K or in your partnership, then we don't have to worry about that piece. But things can be phased in or come in as needed. So I'm just going to list just a few things that each section sort of covers, and like I said, it's a 3-page document, so I'm not going to go through them all. General information is basically an identification of partners, contract details, the roles of partners around decision making, and compliance of policies. That's an important one because it's important to understand that if you're partnering with a Head Start, they have different standards than, say, the DOE has. And so the partnerships need to meet all partners' standards and policies. That's really important. And then insurance is under there also. The preschool collaborative systems is broken down into those 5 pieces. So classrooms, collaboration, and partnerships is really around collaborating on program and school calendar, your hours, weeks, days, number of children served, the dose and duration, application process, inclusive settings, community assessment process comes under that one. And there's a whole bunch of other things, attendance policies, transportation, meal service, those sorts of things. Communication also is a very important one because the communication is kind of the foundation of building a community partnership that is a positive, strong one. So this includes naming contact people and what those people are in charge of, your meeting schedule and participants, how to report data, how you deal with communication with parents, responsibility around partners of other agencies that may come in for services in the SAU or in the collaborative classroom. and professional development, personnel policies. And then funding, again, is also, you know, it's all very important. So I say that about each one, which is kind of funny, but so that's really around commitments and responsibilities that each partner brings to the table, including salaries, improvement, quality issues, that sort of thing. Personnel and staffing. What we were just talking about is which entity employs and supervises which staff or all staff. Pay scales, professional developments, supervision procedures around staff scheduling, and then we have school readiness and transition, and that really is having plans and policies in place that both partners agree on around how to transition students and families into the pre-K program, into the partnership, or into a kindergarten program. And then school readiness and what that looks like for your community and your partnership. Curriculum, instruction, and child assessment is exactly what it talks about there. And so that's deciding which partner will provide curriculum, what the instruction will look like, and what child assessment tools will be used, and how the assessments will be shared with parents. And it's important that everybody's kind of on the same page about that. There are partnerships that use different assessment tools and different curriculums in different classrooms, which is perfectly fine. It's just a matter of having it in the checklist, having it down on paper so everybody understands what the differences is. It's also another way to give families choices to have different curriculums, which is important. And that also includes inclusive environments, which is also very important. And then program assessment is around health and safety, staff training, quality improvement, that sort of thing. And before, I do have a weird view. I can't actually see anybody, which is so weird for me. But before I move on, I hit something and luckily I have my screen, but okay. Before I move on, I know that's a lot of information. And like I said, it's a 3-page long checklist. So does anybody have any questions or anything around any of that before we move on to the next piece?
There is a really great question from Sam in the chat box, which makes me chuckle because for whatever reason, schools and private partners always meet at the table around food, right? So there's always a conversation and a negotiation that has to happen around providing food and meals to students. And so your question, Sam, in the chat around schools partnering with Head Start, whether they're a partner or not, but how schools go about providing family style meals for students. So this is a best practice strategy, to your point, in a partnership with Head Start or not. In Head Start programs, Marcy, correct me if I'm wrong, family style meals is a requirement or is it just strongly encouraged?
It's a part of the standards, yes, it's a requirement.
Okay. So if you have a Head Start partner, then this is a non-negotiable for them. They have to provide meals, breakfast, lunch, in a family style manner. And I say it's best practice because we often will talk to standalone programs, meaning ones that do not have a partner, to provide their meals and snacks in this way as well. So typically that happens in the classroom. There's no transition out to a cafeteria or anything like that, especially in the beginning of the school year, right? There's enough going on for these young students. Adding one more transition or carrying a tray to a table or sitting at a table meant for an 8th grader, not a 4-year-old, can be really intimidating. So we always encourage schools to consider providing meals in the classroom for as long as possible and start the transition into the cafeteria later in the year when they get closer to kindergarten. But family style meals are wonderful. So it's a chance for students to sit around a table with their educator, with an adult, and just share a meal together, right? It's a time to practice manners, of course, a time to practice safe and healthy eating habits, but it's also a fantastic time for conversation. So mealtime, snack time should not be silent, right? Obviously, there's safety involved. We don't want students talking with mouthfuls of food. That should go without saying. But it's also a really great time for the adult at the table to interact with students, talk about what they're eating, perhaps, talk about what they've experienced today, talk about anything and everything that happens in their lives. It's a fantastic time to model how that conversation strategy works, right? It's a give and take. So it's very, I say easily done. It's probably easier said than done, to be honest. but definitely doable, highly encouraged to provide family style meals. This COVID year was probably a little more difficult for obvious reasons around that. Moving forward, I'm optimistic that we can get students back at a table, sharing, bowls, passing things around, sharing food in that way.
I will add to that. I think it's funny that you mentioned that everybody around the table, it always comes back to food. I spent a number of years working in a Head Start pre-K public collaborative program with 2 classrooms in 2 different schools in an RSU up in my area. And I was with the Head Start. And so, yes, that's a sticking point. It has to happen. And the funny, like the joke, every month we had a collaboration meeting. And every month it started with, okay, where are we with meals? What's going on with food? Who's bringing this? It was always about food, and it just became a real. It was the icebreaker. What it was. But I will also tell you that within the 2 classrooms that I was the supervisor in, they both did it completely separately. And so one classroom, they scheduled their meals earlier than the rest of the school, which is like 11:30. And I think everybody else, was a small school, so everybody else went at noon. And yes, the tables are too big. They're falling off the benches. It's overwhelming. They're not tall enough. The little ones, they're not tall enough to put their trays away. And so they worked really hard with their nutrition experts in the kitchen, with their principal, with me, and with the teachers in the classroom to figure out how that worked. And they came up with a really amazing system. One of the ed techs who was bringing children or class to a different area would bring the food back, and then we had to figure out schedules. But it ended up working in the end, and it worked out perfectly. The other classroom was one classroom, and then it was an older elementary school that didn't have other children, and it was just that one classroom. Ended up being the district office. So they had a cafeteria that was all to themselves, and they brought tables and chairs appropriate size down, so they were able to leave the classroom and transition the children in a way, because they want in that the teacher I worked with in that program, it was very important to her for kindergarten readiness that the children could follow that routine. And so they would go to, and they were the only ones there with appropriately sized tables and chairs. And so they would go down and they would get their items and they would sit at the table, and then all the food was family style. So it really depends on, what your partnership looks like, what your standards are around that, and how you can work with your schools and your programs to make that happen. But it's definitely can be done a number of different ways. Were there any other questions around the checklist or any of the pieces? Okay, so the last thing I want to say is, because, like I said, just reading the chat. Yeah, I think staying in one room is definitely easier on transitioning to lunch, transitioning after lunch. I agree with that. So the last thing I want to say is, even though the checklist is very, very long and it's very in-depth and there's a lot of incredible information on it, don't be overwhelmed, because coming up tentatively, the first 3, and correct me if I have the date, I'm not going to give the dates, but the times are on, but the first 3 Wednesdays in August, we will be putting on a partnership TA opportunity. It will be open to all, and it's going to be a 3-part series. We haven't completely nailed down the days and times, but I believe it will be those first 3 weeks, thinking on a Wednesday, where we'll explore the myths, benefits, and barriers of partnerships and how to break those barriers down. The second session will be a panel of experts of administrators, Head Start administrators, SAU administrators, teachers, pre-K coordinators from around the state who have built partnerships and have been successful, and how they did that. That will be a 1-hour panel discussion. And then the final one will be how to start the process and how to sustain partnerships. And so keep an eye on the newsroom, because it will be coming out through there. And I will try to find a link to our PD calendar and throw that in the chat room while Nicole's doing the next piece.
Thanks, Marcy. Okay, the last subtopic of collaborations and partnerships in the guidebook is partnership quality and accountability. So this can be found on page 12. So there's a misconception that your formal partner, if you choose to have one, has to be a certain level on our quality rating and improvement system, which is also known as our QRIS system. So while we strongly encourage partners to be at least a level 3 out of 4 on the current step scale, or at least a 4 out of 5 on the rating scale that's being updated, which isn't released yet, but we're going from a 4-step to a 5-star. So that's strongly encouraged because we know that programs who are licensed and register with the QRIS system and fall within a 3 or 4 will likely meet Chapter 124's requirements with little to no issue. So it's sort of a no-brainer. With that said, we also know that there are many high-quality programs out there who don't register on the QRIS system. So therefore, they won't show up as a level 3 or a level 4. And we don't want those folks to be excluded just because they choose not to be recognized through our quality rating. So don't let that stop you from initiating a conversation with a potential partner. One thing you can do, so there's a link here, which will take you to our QRIS site. Just a minute, I'll show you what it looks like. Oh, I already had it open too. So this provides more information on our quality rating and improvement system. So the new updated version is going to be called Rising Stars for Me. This is what moves it to a 5-star system. It's gone through a pilot. The report is here for those that are interested. Main Roads to Quality, our PDN, our Professional Development Network, works really closely with our QRIS system as well. So there's resources there as well. And some other things here. The other link that I have available that I strongly encourage folks to review is this childcare choices. So this link will bring you to a page, and I'll show you in just a moment, but the key thing to look at is going to be this search feature. So let me click here. Okay, so when you click on that link, it's going to bring you to the home page of childcare choices, which is not this because I advanced it already. And whether you're starting a program, here's the homepage. This is where it'll bring you. Whether you're starting a program or, like I said, looking to reach out to your community programs every few years, whether you're looking to have a partner, this is a pretty good starting place if you're not familiar with what's available in your area already. So when you search for childcare in Maine, this is what brings you to that search engine that I had clipped before. You can search by address, you can search by city, you can search by zip. If you're going locally, I would recommend going by zip code. Mine, for example, is 04345. So the next thing to do is I would encourage you to leave the rest of these filters blank, except for this one, type of provider. You can filter by family, by center, or by family or center both. So I would do that. The other will only give you programs that have slots available. So it's not going to give you the full gamut of what's actually licensed and in your area. So if you leave those blank, you'll get a better response. So then you find the licensed providers, and here we are. You'll see that all of these fall within my school district, our catchment area. And there's a lot. So there's our Head Start pops up, our local Boys and Girls Club pops up, and then some private providers as well. The little colored boxes is their QRIS level. So that means that they've registered with the system and the system recognizes them as a level 1, level 2, 3, 4, etc. Again, as I said earlier, just because they're registered and recognized as a 1, perhaps, doesn't mean that they couldn't potentially be a partner one way or another. So don't let that discourage your outreach. And then those that do not register within the QRIS system just show up as a blank house. So they're licensed, they just don't have a QRIS level. Okay, still not a reason to ignore that, so to speak. And then if you click on a provider, it'll pop up with more of their information. You'll see that this particular provider does not have any open slots, so they're full. They accept subsidy, which may or may not make a difference to you in a partnership. And then you can click on their licensing details, and this will give you all the information around their program over the last few years. So they have a full license, it's been approved and renewed, etc., on all these dates. If they've had any concerns or anything that they've had to address, then that typically shows up as well. So when you are thinking of reaching out to your community providers, this is a really great starting point because it's going to give you all of the ones that are licensed in your area and their contact information. You can also search license exempt programs. There's one. And then that's for programs. So hopefully programs that are part of this system log in regularly to update all of their information that's provided on here so that it's all up to date. Oh my goodness, sorry, hold on. Okay, great question in the chat room from Mary Beth, which we can address. I'm just going to scroll for just another minute. Thank you, Marcy, for dropping in the link to the newsroom. Okay, so yeah, Mary Beth talking about specials. So a lot of programs provide, art, gym, music to their 4-year-olds. Again, not a requirement. Some schools get hung up on the fact that teachers who instruct the allied arts aren't necessarily certified to work with children younger than kindergarten. That doesn't worry me one bit, because if the teacher is willing to work with your pre-K classroom, then I wouldn't discourage that. But I would also keep in mind, to your point in the chat, the number of transitions that students are experiencing. And if it gets to be too much, then to sort of revisit how you can address art standards, music standards, physical development standards in the classroom, and perhaps by not transitioning out all the time. Sometimes the allied arts teachers will come to your classroom to provide the instruction. Sometimes you can just work with that educator to talk about, what are some strategies, what are some things I could introduce to my students around art, music, gym, etc. That I could be doing as to avoid transitions all the time, but that I could just do on my own in the classroom as part of my own curriculum. So there's a number of ways to do that. Mary Beth also put her email in there, so if other teachers or folks have thoughts or ideas around that, looks like you are encouraged to reach out to her with ideas on that. The same is true for guidance counselors as well.
I would also add around the extra transitions. I probably would not start those extra disciplines and going out of the classroom time until maybe October, November. Give the children a month or two to get used to the regular classroom routine, and then very slowly add something new to the schedule. Twice a week, maybe. Try to, if you can. I know it's hard with scheduling all of the classes in one school, but if you can keep them at the same time during the day. So, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 11, we go to music and we go to PE, or, whatever you're going to. Just try to think about not bringing too many transitions in at the very beginning of the school year.
Mm-hmm. I know some schools too will sort of alternate. So they'll do art, for example, art class for 2 months, and then do music class for 2 months, and then do gym or whatnot, as opposed to having them all at once during the week.
And the other thought I have around it is in the, after the winter and in the spring, if you are doing art in the classroom, you may think about starting to transition out and going into the art room, because again, those are things they're going to be doing the next year when they're in kindergarten. So getting used to those transitions in the spring and getting used to that change in routine and leaving the room is also a positive for school readiness and their transition into kindergarten.
Okay, so we have plenty of time for questions or clarifications. That web address brings you to the parking lot page, which I'm going to go to now as well to see if there's anything that I can address in there. But feel free to unmute and use the chat box. If you don't have any questions and feel like you're good to go, then you're welcome to sign up. Oh, actually, I forgot your certificate is here too.
I was gonna say that, but then I was like,
Let me put it in the chat box.